Welcome to the Workers' Reading Room. Today I'll be starting a new book. This is one of the few, if only, fiction books that I think fits this channel. It's called F.I.S.T by Joe Eszterhas. It was originally a movie in 1978, a Sylvester Stallone movie, and it was novelized and made into a book, which was quite common in the 70s. It's based loosely on Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters Union, and it's basically the story of a man who gets involved in a union, eventually the rise to the top, the rise and fall type of thing of a union man. So as far as fiction books go, I think this is one of the few that actually fits, and I actually enjoy the book, so I think I'm just going to read it. Something a little bit lighter to go along with the American trade unionism, which I've been keeping up with. So this book isn't divided into traditional chapters. It's basically part 1 is the first half of the book, part 2 is the second half or second third or whatever. So I'm just going to break it up myself into reasonable sized videos, and hopefully you'll all enjoy it. So this is F.I.S.T by Joe Eszterhas. I'll be calling this part 1. Cleveland, July 1934. At 6:30 in the morning, Joe Kovac walked through the flats to his blast furnace at the Baldwin & Johnson steel mill. He was 52 years old, a hulking, heavy-footed man whose name had been Kovacs until an immigration official misspelled it at Ellis Island. He walked through a pit, a giant industrial valley of steel mills, smokestacks, and time-worn docks half sunken into the Cuyahoga River. The river snaked past refineries and coke works and was oily and blood-red. At night, the pit was afire and open hearth furnaces blazed, leaping purple patterns against the sky. Joe Kovac lived and worked here. The pit was home. His shirt was soggy. The humidity off Lake Erie choked him. Boiling, sweltering summer heat. Heat that could kill. A figure crawled in the street ahead of him. The street shimmered and Joe Kovac wiped the sweat from his eyes and walked closer. It was the gypsy. The gypsy crawled along the red brick on his hands and knees, and for a while Joe Kovac watched him. He was not astounded by the sight. The gypsy played the violin at Ziggy's Tavern. Like all gypsies, he played the violin well. Like all gypsies, he was mad. The gypsy kept his nose to the ground and crawled from brick to brick. "Did you lose something?" Joe Kovac asked in Hungarian. The gypsy looked at him. His face was soot-stained, his eyes bloodshot. He wore a crimson vest and baggy pants, his costume each night at Ziggy's. "I have lost my job." "Ziggy kicked you out? What did you do?" "Nothing." Joe Kovac smiled. "My friend, did you put your hands on the waitress again?" "Nothing," the gypsy insisted. "I played my violin." "You are talking like a gypsy." Joe Kovac frowned. It was absurd. He was standing in the middle of the street talking to a grown man who was scuttling along in the gutters. "There is not enough money. Ziggy can't pay me." The gypsy picked something out of the gutter, scrutinized it, and handed it to Joe Kovac. "It is my gift to you," the gypsy smiled. "It is a very fine button." "I don't want your button." "But it is a wonderful button." "Enough about the button," Joe Kovac said sharply. "Let us forget the button. What are you doing crawling in the street?" The gypsy smiled beatifically. He glanced around and whispered, "I am looking for the gold." "What gold?" "The gold they promised. In America, they said the streets are paved with gold." Joe Kovac laughed. It was a booming, joyous laugh which echoed in the empty street. "Fool," he said. "Have you found any gold?" "No, but I have found the button," the gypsy said. "It is a beginning." Joe Kovac walked away from him, shaking his head and mumbling. At the corner he stopped and looked back. The gypsy was still watching him, still laughing, still on his hands and knees, holding high his button. He walked down the narrow streets toward his mill. Bridges overhead shadowed him. Expensive, chrome-shiny cars rushed through the sky. Some days as he walked to work, he could see smug, suit-wearing men looking down at him. Joe Kovac knew on those mornings that he was trapped, a captive of bosses who ran the mill, who ran the world. They hurled cigar and cigarette butts into the pit. Once every few years, one of them drove his car over the side of a bridge. The car came crashing down, a bomb meant to remind Joe Kovac of his helplessness. Bluffs blocked both sides of the flat. This morning he could see the sun glinting blindingly off the glass in the terminal tower building. It was 51 stories high, and Ilona said it was beautiful, the biggest building in the world. But Ilona was wrong. It was the world's tallest watchtower. It told him there was no escape. His sentence was lifelong. At night, 6 shafts of light flashed from the watchtower's tip. They said they were a beacon for ships. Joe Kovac knew what they were. Searchlights. But at least he had work. It was more than many people down here could say. He didn't have to eat fried flour, tripe, or soup bones. He didn't have to re-sole his shoes with the rubber strips of old tires. As he turned onto River Road, less than half a mile from the mill now, Joe Kovac smiled. Torn and faded, the billboard had big letters that said, "World's highest standard of living. There's no way like the American way." It showed a well-dressed man, his wife, and their children riding in a new car. They were all smiling. Each morning, as he walked the 2 miles to his blast furnace, Joe Kovac smiled at them. Each morning, as they rode in their new car, they returned his smile. A group of children were bouncing a rubber ball in the middle of the street. Joe Kovac stopped and watched them. A gangly boy with carrot hair took the ball. "Sally Rand has lost her fan," the boy said, in rhythm with the bouncing ball. "Give it back, you nasty man," the children giggled. Joe Kovac walked on. Children. He wondered what Johnny would do today. At least he didn't have to worry about Abe. Abe would go down to Fleckner's and earn his wage. That was Abe. With all his speech-making and book reading, Abe went to work each morning and earned his wage. Not Johnny. Not his own son. Johnny couldn't hold a job longer than a few months. He yelled at the foreman, hit somebody, caused trouble. Always trouble. Never enough trouble. Mule-headed as a boy even. Before they came to Cleveland, Joe Kovac had worked in southern Ohio at the Truetown mine. He didn't make very much money. The food on the table was never very good. The boy wouldn't eat it. No matter what they said to him, he wouldn't eat it. Ilona was afraid Johnny would starve. The boy had to be taught a lesson. "You sit here at this table," he told the boy one morning, "until you eat." Johnny sat there. He was 4 years old. He sat at that table for 17 hours. His son was just as mule-headed now, Joe Kovac knew. He had grown tall and handy with his fists, but he hadn't changed. Nothing ever really changed in the flats. Ilona said it was his fault, and maybe she was right. "He even looks like you," Ilona said. Yes, but there was more to it. Johnny had his size, his thick black hair, his cheekbones, but his eyes were different. It was the anger. There was burning coal in his son's eyes. When Joe Kovac got to the Baldwin and Johnson gate and showed the guard his card, he was overcome once again, as he was each morning, by his hatred for the mill. The heavy lifting strained his back. The hours were so long that some nights he was too tired even to eat. The roar of the booming big machines was deafening. But what he thought about each morning when he woke up was the mill heat. His face was his work record. His eyes bore a permanent squint. His skin was the texture of baked leather. But he had made peace with the way his face had changed. His face was worth 68 cents an hour, the pension he would get at 65. It was his difficulty breathing that frightened him. Sometimes, in the past few years, he had felt momentarily weak. He had had to ask the foreman's permission to go outside for a breath of fresh air. Kraus was an okay guy. He had never given him a hard time about it. So Joe Kovac never said anything to anybody about his breathing problems. He knew that Ilona would become alarmed, and a doctor might find something that would cost him his job. As he walked into the mill this morning, Kraus waved him over with a smile. He knew what was coming. "Did you hear the one about the horse? Goes into the bar, asks for a bottle of Dago Red and some horseradish?" Kraus said. "Bullshit," Joe Kovac told Kraus. Always more bullshit. Listen to it, Kraus laughed. Okay, I listen. This horse walks into a bar and asks for some Dago Red with some horseradish, Kraus said. I listened that already. The bartender hands the red over and then he gives the horseradish. The horseradish. Get it? I get it. Yeah, Joe Kovac said. The horse drinks the red and knocks off the horseradish and he says, You probably think it's pretty funny, me coming in here asking for Dago Red and horseradish. Real funny. Yeah, Joe Kovac said. Hell no, the bartender says. I like my red that way myself. Kraus roared and slapped him on the back. Bullshit, Joe Kovac said, smiling. Always full of bullshit. Kraus stopped laughing. Joe Kovac waited. He knew it was coming. Listen, Joe, Kraus said. I'm sorry I gotta do it to you, but I got nobody else right now. I need you up above to clean out the carbon. It was the job in the mill which he hated the most. Kraus rarely gave it to him. He respected his difficulty with the scorching heat. He grinned. You think I'm going to tell you I'm not going to do it? You're a hell of a man, Kraus said, smiling. I always said that. I'm a hell of a man. What the hell I'm doing in this goddamn place? Joe Kovac said, and walked away towards the coke works. He could feel the awful intensity of the heat already. He climbed up a narrow ladder which led to a 6-inch planking built around the mouth of an open oven. He stood on the planking, looked into the oven, and swore. He'd have to keep the flues of the oven free of carbon. He wrapped his hands in burlap and picked up the iron bar which he'd have to jam into the flue. When his hands touched the bar, the burlap went up in flames. He swore again, got some more burlap, wrapped it around his hands, and tried it again. He could feel the heat of the bar, but this time the burlap didn't catch. He jammed the bar into the flue and tried to duck the smoke and gas which billowed toward him. The heat of the oven blew directly into his face. He turned away and tried to breathe, but now he couldn't see what he was doing with the bar. After 45 minutes, he felt weak and slightly dizzy. He put the bar down, climbed down the ladder, and asked Kraus if he could go outside for a few minutes. Sure, Kraus said. Another 10 minutes, I'll get somebody else in. He walked toward the door, feeling off balance again. He noticed that a button was missing from his shirt. He thought about the gypsy crawling around in the street. He smiled. I should have taken his damn button, Joe Kovac thought. Heading for the door in the dim mill light, he felt the dizziness rush him again. He staggered, then fell. Steam rose on all sides of him. His mother and Abe beside him, Johnny sat in the front pew, a few feet from the casket, watching the priest's mouth. The priest's mouth was moving, but he couldn't hear the words. Pretty words, though. He was sure of that. The priest had a whole book full of pretty words for every poor sap who got himself killed down here. Looking at the casket, he caught Abe's eye. It was the cheapest one they could find. A plain wooden box he was sure the old man would have approved of. It didn't cost too many of the $1. That's the way the old man always said it. The $1. The $1 he busted his ass for all his life. The $1 they doled out to him for working in that hellhole. Work, Johnny, the old man had said. Work puts food on the table. Work puts the clothes on your back. Work puts you into the ground, Pa. He looked around the church, glancing occasionally at the priest to make sure the pretty words still flowed from his mouth. He had been an altar boy here. Anybody who went to school at St. Stephen's, the only Hungarian parish in the flats, had to be an altar boy. It was one of their rules. They had a lot of rules, and every time he had broken one of their rules, the nun had spread his hands out on the desk and cracked them with the sharp edge of a ruler until they bled. His hands had bled a lot, but their rulers hadn't stopped him from breaking their rules. When he was in the 8th grade, a nun took him into an empty classroom and told him to kneel. Where did you get this dirty picture? She asked. It was a picture of a naked girl which she had found in his catechism book. He didn't answer her. She slapped him. Where did you get this filth? Her hands were shaking. I found it in the catechism book. Liar, she yelled. She slapped him again. He grinned. It's only a venial sin, sister. It doesn't matter. She slapped him hard, twice. Her face was purple. Cry, she said. You're going to cry. I don't cry, sister. She hit him in the mouth with her fist. Blood dripped down his chin. "Cry," she hissed it. "Hit me again," he said, "and you're gonna be sorry." She raised her arm. He caught it, jumped up to his feet, picked her up, and slammed her hard against the blackboard wall. She sunk to the floor, whimpering and dazed. He wiped the blood off his chin, looked down at her, and smiled. "Don't cry, sister," he said. When the old man came home that night, his mother told him what had happened. The old man took him down to the basement and looked like he was really going to give it to him. He had the catechism book in one hand and the picture of the naked girl in the other. He gazed at the picture a while before saying anything. "Johnny, why you keep the picture in the holy book?" Joe Kovac said. "I don't know, Pa. I figured they wouldn't find it in there. It's a big book." The old man nodded and shifted his attention back to the picture of the girl. The girl was bent over and the picture was taken from behind her, her bare ass stuck high into the air. "How come you got this picture?" the old man said. "What's the matter with it, Pa?" The old man hesitated. "Ain't too pretty, this girl," he said. "You got a picture like this? It ought to be a pretty girl." The old man gave him the book and the picture, and they went upstairs. On the top step, he stopped and turned to him. "Johnny," he said, "don't tell your ma what I says to you." He sat now in the front pew of the church, looking at his father's casket. He was angry. He could feel tears welling up in his eyes. "Why, Pa? Why'd you let him kill you? Why'd you let him push you around? How many times you come home bruised up, cut, burned by the oven? Why, Pa? Why?" The priest's sing-song was his only answer. Yet he knew that his father hadn't been a weak man. When he was 10 years old, the old man took him up to Public Square to buy him a new jacket. They walked into a little shop off Lake Superior. It was a cruel, cold day. An icy wind lashed off the lake. The old man took his cap off and told the clerk in his broken accent that he wanted to buy a jacket for the boy. "I don't have any jackets," the clerk said curtly. The old man pointed to a long row of jackets in the back. "Many jacket? What you mean? I don't have any you can afford," the clerk said. "How much the price? How much can you afford?" $2. "We don't have anything under 3. "Okay, $3. "We don't have anything under 4, the clerk said. "You say 3. 4. $4. I said 4, the clerk yelled. "Now get the hell out of here or I'll call the police." "Police?" Joe Kovac shouted. "Yeah, police. You call police." He grabbed the clerk by the lapels and pulled him close to him. He clutched the clerk's throat and squeezed it. "Please," the clerk said, pale. "Please, let me go." The old man kept squeezing his throat. $2? $2, the clerk said. "Fine, please, $2. It was a beautiful jacket, too, Johnny remembered. The best jacket he'd ever had. The priest finished his sermon now and walked back to the altar. His mother and Abe knelt down. Johnny knelt with them. It was a meaningless gesture, a reflex from his childhood. He kept thinking about his father, how at the same time the old man kept telling him not to get into fights. "You got a head, Johnny, so you don't gotta use your fists." "I know, Pa, I know. You got a head or don't you?" "I got it, Pa. It's right here." "Then you use it." "I got fists too. What am I supposed to do with them?" "Stick 'em in your pockets." "You stuck 'em in your pockets at the mill, Pa. Look where it got you." The priest turned now and gave them his blessing. They got up and surrounded the casket. He looked at his mother, a slight, brittle woman who wore a black dress and a black babushka. She was crying. "You okay, Ma?" She nodded, but didn't say anything. "You want to ride in the funeral car?" "I walk." "You sure, Ma?" Abe said. "Maybe it'd be better if you rode in the car." The priest came out of the sacristy with the 2 altar boys, Johnny and Abe, and some of the men who were Joe Kovac's friends, Mishka Biro, Anton Drugovich, Ziggy Zagon, picked the casket up and walked it out of the church into the blazing sun. They carried it down the steps and placed it gently into the flatbed of the funeral home hearse. With the hearse leading the way, they walked through the flats toward the cemetery halfway up the hillside. It was the same route, Johnny knew, which Joe Kovac had taken to the mill each day. And that will be the end of part 1 of F.I.S.T. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you for listening to the Workers' Reading Room, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Have a good one.